Hello everybody, welcome back to the Northern Forge. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to do a little bit of an overview and a little bit more in-depth on my power hammer, how it works, how I put it together. There's a couple other videos on the channel if you've been around a while. From some earlier iterations, this thing's gone through quite a few changes, upgrades, repairs. But this, I think, is pretty much the final design. Not much is going to change unless something breaks and there's a better way to fix it. So this design is what's referred to as a Da Vinci cam hammer. It gets its name from this cam right here. This is basically a spiral. It gets bigger as it rotates. And so that picks up the hammerhead, and then once it reaches this dropping point, the hammerhead comes back down. This thing is built 90%, 95% out of pieces that I already had. So I'm not going to be releasing any kind of plans or even like measurements really on it, just because I didn't really I didn't build it from any plans. Most of it is what I already had on hand. So I'm just going to start here at the front, or the anvil, I suppose. That's a big chunk of I-beam that I got out of a scrap pile somewhere. There is a big old sucker rod on the front and on the back. It gives it a little bit more weight, gives a little bit more support. The top of the anvil is made of a railroad plate flipped upside down, so the flat side is up. And then a couple of big chunks of 1/2 inch thick by, I think it was 3-inch wide, mild steel that I just cut apart and welded on there. There was originally just one, but in one of the changes I made, sorry, my finger was getting in there. In one of the changes I made, I ended up raising the hammerhead up a little bit, so I had to add a second one. You can see the welds on there look a lot like pigeon crap, but it holds. It hasn't come off yet. Nothing's broken in this part of it. The hammer is just a 16-pound, I believe it was a 16-pound. It was a 12 or a 16. I think it was a 16-pound sledge. I originally tried to use the wooden handle that it came with, but that snapped. So there's a piece of what was originally 1-inch round solid steel. I forged the end down a little bit to fit through the eye. The other end of it slides into this 1-inch tubing. I believe it was a black iron pipe or something very similar, schedule 40-ish. It's held on really well. I drilled a bunch of holes and welded that way it's nice and secure all the way back. There's actually not any weld, kind of hard to see. My lights are on the other side, so it's a little bit in the shadow. There's not any weld around this end. It's all just these plug welds. These eye bolts were where the springs attached originally. This particular hammer, the cam, I wasn't able to get it any slower really, and so it didn't fall fast enough, so I added some springs, and you'll see those in just a second. We're going to work our way back. Here's kind of a saddle horn that I did, because right under here are the bearings. Those are what roll on the cam. Those are actually just skateboard bearings sitting in or on 5/16 bolts. I originally had some really long bolts because this was all made of wood and it was all built out, and when the hammer handle snapped off, I decided that I was just going to replace it with steel. So I've just got these 2 plates welded on either side. Bolts go through. I believe there's 4 bearings. Let's see if I can see in there. There's 4 bearings on each bolt. You could, in theory, get away with not having 4 rows of bearings, but because my cam isn't perfectly isn't perfectly rounded, it kind of moves down the hammer shaft as it goes. So I've got multiple rows. That way, when it gets far enough back, this one, and then moves to that one, and that one, and that one, and so on. In the back here, we just got a couple mounting plates with a nice 1/2-inch bolt going through. This is another piece of that same 1-inch pipe that the arm is made out of. And then on the edges, you can just see in there, there are some bronze bushings. There we go. You can just see a little bit of bronze peeking through. There's actually two because I couldn't find a 1-inch outer diameter, 1/2-inch inner diameter bronze bushing at my local hardware store. So I have a 1 to 3/4 and then a 3/4 to half, or maybe it's a 1 to 5/8 and 5/8 to half, something like that. There's 2 layers. Fits in there nicely. On one of the more recent repairs, I had a shorter bolt in here, and I didn't realize for a while the threads of the bolt actually chewed up the bronze bushing that was in there, and it gave it a lot of back and forth wobble room. So now I've got a longer bolt. The threads, there's a bunch of washers stacked up here because the threads stop out here, and I didn't have enough to actually tighten it up. But when I did that, I also added this grease zerk. So this entire pipe basically is filled with axle grease, just to give it a little bit more lubrication, and you can see some of it squeaks out the sides, which means it's doing exactly what it's supposed to. And I just add a little bit more periodically. So that's the hammer part of it. You can see these are trampoline springs, just some nice heavy ones that I had. I believe I got these, or the original ones. When I had them up here, I had an issue with the springs getting stretched out because they would overextend. Back here, I have not had that issue, which is the main reason why I moved it back. But I believe the original ones I got from my father-in-law, and these ones, I might have bought these ones, but I can't say for sure. Their trampoline springs are easy to get, so if you're trying to make something similar to this, find somebody getting rid of a busted trampoline, get some springs, easy peasy. There's just some miscellaneous other pieces. We've got some 1/4 inch by, I want to say it's 1/4 inch by 5, maybe 1/4 inch by 6 that holds in the cam. I've got some pillow block bearings. I believe that's the proper name for them. These are greasable bearings. There's a collar on that side. There used to be a collar on that side, but I've since replaced it with just the nut. The bearings moves nice and easy. Down in there, if you can see, there's a little bit of a flange that goes from steel to wood. That's what connects the cam to the 1/2-inch bolt that acts as the shaft down here. That is one of the biggest failure points that I have had to deal with on this entire project, is that those flanges failing all the time. So they're actually now welded to the shaft instead of, there used to be a set screw, but I had so many issues I decided if I ever have to take it out again, it's getting cut out and I'm going to redo it some other way. You can see these are the new eye bolts. They're welded in both sides. Sorry, you're a little upside down there, but both sides are welded in. Those hold the springs. The drive shaft for that cam is an old bicycle wheel. Tire cut off, and it's the rear wheel so that it will spin freely in this direction and it will catch in this direction. So if the cam wants to keep spinning from momentum after I shut the motor off, it can, and it won't bring the tire, or won't bring the wheel along with it. It won't backfeed power into the system. That comes via belt down to a 2-inch pulley down here. I have a roughly 1 to 11 gear ratio on these, pulley ratio, whatever you want to call it, which is why I'm using the tire. I could not find a pulley big enough, so 22-inch bicycle rim did the trick. That brings it down to approximately 180 hits per minute, or about 3 hits per second, which I found to be a good speed for this hammer. It's powered by a 1.5 horse motor. That's just an electric motor, came out of a furnace. You can see the pedal here. There's some springs in the back. Those help hold the weight of the motor up, because the way this thing activates and deactivates, we have this pedal in the front. You step on the pedal, puts tension on the belt, and without those springs in the back, the motor weight alone is enough to put the tension on to keep it driving as soon as the motor turns on. So those basically counteract the motor, give it the ability to spin freely, and then when I put my foot on the front pedal here, it goes. That whole frame assembly is mostly built out of rebar. There's a little bit of 3/8 square in there, just because I didn't have any straight rebar at the time. It was easier to grab the 3/8. The pedal is cut out of a big concrete saw blade I found at a transfer site. The motor mount is actually a piece of the same thing. It just comes back here to some little pivots. You can see in there, I do have some lifting rings on there, so if I ever have to pick it up and move it with equipment, if I'm moving it more than a little bit, this thing's very heavy. I've never actually weighed it, but I would estimate probably 300 pounds total weight. So definitely bigger than what I can reasonably move very far by hand. So I've got those. I can run some rope down through those, pick it up off the ground. The electrical comes around here. I originally put an outlet on because the motor I was going to use had a plug already built in. So I was just going to use that outlet and then run it off the switch. That outlet is now powered all the time. I rewired it. If you guys don't know, for those who don't know me in real life, I am an electrician by trade, so easy peasy on that. That's permanently wired. The motor is permanently wired now. It goes to the switch. Power is constantly served to those outlets. That way, if I want to plug something in to get power closer to my forge, I can. That was a bigger deal where I had it before because I didn't have very good power there. But in the new shop, it's not quite as big an issue, so it works out. And then the bottom plate is a 1/4 inch thick plate of steel. It is 2x4. The other side is actually diamond plate, but I didn't have any use for it, so that's what it became. And then, of course, there's this pipe in the back. That's used to be a fence post, I believe, that somebody was getting rid of, so I picked it up. So I think the only things on here that I really bought are a bunch of nuts and bolts, the bearings, the bushings, and the hammerhead. And pretty much the rest of it was all, at least all the key components were all salvaged, scrapped, whatever you want to refer to it. But yeah, this frame was originally going to be a treadle hammer. And I had a different idea for a power hammer, but this one evolved and became a power hammer instead. If you have any questions about anything on here, let me know in the comments down below. I'm always happy to answer questions. If you are thinking about building something like this yourself, feel free to ask me any questions. I can't guarantee that I will be able to have an answer, let alone a good answer, but I will always be happy to assist the best way I can, or maybe I can point you in the right direction for somebody else to ask who knows better than I do. But there it is. That's how this old girl works. I built it all myself, did 100% of the welding, and she runs great, does what I need. There are a couple of downsides to a hammer like this. If you are thinking about building your own power hammer and wondering what kind, this one, very easy to build, very easy to design. Didn't have to do any real complicated math. There's no fancy counterbalances or anything like that. One issue that I've had with this one, this bottom plate, absolutely not thick enough. There's quite a bit of flex in there. Once summer rolls around and it warms up, I'm planning on tipping her over and welding some angle iron on the underside. That'll give it a lot more rigidity. It'll stop flexing so much. The other downside to this style of hammer is I have very little speed control. I have a little bit of speed control just by pressing harder or less hard on the pedal. I can let that belt slip a little bit, but not a ton of speed control. And I have absolutely zero control over how hard it hits. Every time that hammer comes up and drops, it hits exactly the same hard. It would be really nice to have a hammer that I could control the impact, but this one, it does not have any way to do that. Not without, maybe changing out those springs to something stronger. But yeah, there's no way. And then the other downside to this particular design is the only time that hammerhead and that anvil are parallel is when it's nearly all the way down. I did design it to fit, I think it's about a 1/2 inch in there for them to be perfectly parallel. And any more, and it starts to, lean out this way, any less, and it starts to lean in this way. So that's something that I have to be aware of when I'm working on it. Is it sometimes isn't going to isn't going to forge completely flat. It's not usually that big of an issue because the change in angle is pretty small for most things, but it does get to be a problem if I'm working something really big. I've done some leaf springs in this, and it took a while just because there's that angle. And the thicker the piece you're putting in, the weaker your hit's going to be because your hammerhead has less time to fall. So it takes a little bit longer to work that bigger stuff. But it does work, and it was nearly free, minus, the time and a bunch of welding rods. And it was a great experience. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you like this, you want to see more content like this, please like and subscribe. I try and upload a video at least once a week. It happens most of the time. I'm not doing this full time, so if I miss a week here and there, please forgive me. But yeah, if you want to see more, let me know what you'd like to see in the comments down below, and have a great night.